I'm Rebecca Matheson, and I teach here in the Neuroscience Center at BYU.
My name is Joe Schmutz. Currently, I'm an ophthalmologist.
My name is Adam Bergeson, and I'm an orthopedic surgeon in Utah County.
My name is Jordan Jorgensen, and I'm a neuroscientist.
My name is Mandy Nelson. So my future plans in neuroscience are to stay in neuroscience. I'm going to do a PhD, hopefully in an addiction-related laboratory somewhere.
My name is Ashley Markham. So I plan on going into research, actually with NASA, to help study how the human body can last in space longer.
My name is Athena Howell, and my plan for when I graduate is I plan to start a neuro PhD program so that I can teach and do research in the future.
My name is Elizabeth Anderson, and I am a neuroscience major, and I want to be a doctor.
My name is Thomas Jarman. I'm a neuroscience major. I am currently planning on attending medical school.
Well, working with a lot of undergraduates now, I see a lot of undergraduates who feel like their interests are really diverse, that they have interests in the sciences, in the humanities, in the arts, in working with people and doing research and evidence-based practice. And I think that I was very similar as an undergraduate. And to me, I decided to major in neuroscience because it united all these different things. It was the humanity of the sciences, and to me, the science of the humanities.
I chose to major in neuroscience because I always have had a love for the biological sciences. And in 2000, when I started undergraduate work at BYU, neuroscience was kind of a hot new topic. I thought it'd be interesting to, try something new. I'd read a little bit about it, but I kind of decided when I was a senior in high school that was what I'd be interested in doing.
I chose my major in neuroscience as a preparation for medical school. I started out in chemistry and after about a year or two of that, decided to change over to neuroscience. I found it very engaging and educational preparation for what I thought I would be doing in my future.
I chose to major in neuroscience because I was interested in how the brain works. Originally, I started out as a music major, and I went to a talk from President Monson, and he told us to challenge ourselves and try to do something that would help us grow. And at the time, one of my friends was a neuroscientist, and I decided that I was really interested in neuroscience and that that's something that would challenge me, as if I were to change into that major. So I changed schools and changed majors and became a neuroscientist.
So I chose to major in neuroscience because I was originally at a different university and I was a double chemistry psychology major, and I went to this career fair and I met this neuroscience PhD student who talked to me about it, and I realized that there's this great marriage between behavior and chemistry, and it just kind of came together and I transferred to BYU.
I chose to major in neuroscience because I think it's one of the most fascinating areas of study, because there's this thing that we have in our heads that's controlling what we do, and that to me is just so fascinating, and that there's this perception that we have of the world that is all mediated by this fundamental thing that we don't really even understand.
I chose to major in neuroscience because I have a very, very diverse interests, and I was in a major that was very focused and very narrow, and I found it was too constraining, and I couldn't explore the many different aspects that I really liked, and neuroscience is the only major I could think of where I can combine everything.
So I chose a major in neuroscience because my dad's a neuroscientist, and I think that always fascinated me, hearing stories about the brain and his patients. He's a psychiatrist as well. And then when I got into high school, my senior year, I took a neuroscience class, and we got to train rats, and we got to learn about the human mind, and it just fascinated me, and I love learning about people, and I realized I wanted to know not just what people were thinking, I wanted to learn how they thought.
So I chose a major in neuroscience because I wanted to choose something that really overlapped with the requirements for medical school. To me, especially now that I've been in the program, I've realized that this major really prepares me for the kinds of things I'll have to be doing as a physician in terms of critical thinking, in terms of understanding my patients, both the physiology and the emotional and behavioral side of the patients that I would be working with as a physician.
Saying that you're a neuroscientist and saying that you study neuroscience is always going to be one of those things that gets a reaction that's kind of ooh. It's kind of one of those things like astrophysics that has a sort of buzz to it. But it's actually when you get past that, when discussing neuroscience with someone, that it really becomes rewarding, that you can can see that neuroscience is something that they have to deal with all the time, and that they probably have an innate understanding and some innate misunderstandings of neuroscience that actually influence their behavior every day.
You know, out within the professional community or academic world, when I tell people that I'm a neuroscience major, they have a lot of respect for that. It's a growing field, and you know, coming from BYU with a neuroscience major, people have a certain expectation of your knowledge base or your expertise or your skill set.
My BYU neuroscience degree has been a very positive thing for me. BYU certainly has an excellent reputation, and the neuroscience program certainly has a growing reputation.
Not many people really know about my degree. In my peers, they don't really ask about BYU per se. But I guess the thing that mostly mattered is that when I went into graduate school and went into my postdoc, I knew the basics of neuroscience, and I was better prepared to succeed because of that.
BYU is really a special institution because of their emphasis on undergraduate research. When I made it to medical school, I was very surprised that my colleagues from really brand name top tier schools didn't have the opportunity to do undergraduate research like I had. So maybe they were good at the things like biochemistry, those courses we all need to take to go to medical school or graduate school, but they didn't have that experience with actually coming up with operational or mechanistic experiments to answer a new question. That just was something that they hadn't had experience with that. I think that BYU students really come in with a lot of advantage in that area.
Doing research as an undergraduate, you know, any papers or any presentations that you publish, even as an undergraduate, will follow you throughout your life, you know, but having had that experience, it gave me the ability to go on later and do other research projects. Being involved, you know, as an undergraduate is key, you know, to helping you later, you know, in the academic world. And it can really help you get a leg into a lot of doors for future projects.
My undergraduate research experience was very formative. The opportunity to have ownership for a project and to seek funding for that project and to carry the project through to completion, which included writing about the project in a peer-reviewed publication and also presenting that in poster form, was an excellent opportunity for to learn how that process works, and that has been repeated on multiple occasions since, and was a great introduction to future opportunities.
My undergraduate research experience was really pivotal for getting where I am now. Because of my research background, I was able to get into a great, fantastic graduate school. And as I started my graduate school rotations, I understood how to perform experiments. They knew that they could trust my research, and it really was a lot different from other graduate students who were stuck washing test tubes, and that was their research background as undergrads.
When I entered in neuroscience, I didn't really know that several years later I would be doing exactly what I was learning. I loved it so much that the career that I chose and that I created for myself out of my neuroscience education really directly mirrors my education. I teach the same classes that I took several years ago here at BYU. But it was also a really good preparation for me in medical school. I attended medical school, and the neuroscience education that I got at BYU really gave me the information that I needed to excel in medical school.
Neuroscience as a major really prepared me well for a medical career. I felt like it was a great pre-professional career. I actually still use a lot of what I learned originally in neuroscience. A lot of what I do in ophthalmology deals with the optic nerve in the brain. I felt like I was ahead of a lot of my classmates in medical school because I had a background in neuroscience.
My neuroscience major helped me prepare for my chosen career in that it encouraged critical thinking. It helped me to learn how to find answers to questions, and it kind of facilitated opportunities to do research and develop some good lifelong learning habits. Since
I'm a neuroscientist, everything about my major helped prepare me for my career. Learning the basics of neuroscience and also learning how to perform research.
I was really surprised how interdisciplinary neurosciences. There are wide varieties of things to do in it. I thought it was pretty much medical or PhD, but there are so many options.
What was probably most surprising about the neuroscience major is probably that the professors are very much engaged in who you are as a person, and I kind of had the idea that I wouldn't know my professors on a personal level, but all the neuroscience professors have taken like great care and in who I am as a person and as a scientist.
The thing that surprised me the most about the neuroscience major is that it's just open. I thought I would have to apply to the program. I thought it would be very selective, and it just wasn't. And I think it's so cool because everybody should have the opportunity to take a neuroscience class to learn about like how our brains work and how our brain like controls us, or how we control our brain, or just anything, because it applies to everyone, I think.
I was surprised by how much chemistry and physics there was, but also how relevant they were. Sometimes in other majors those feel like just extra requirements, but I have used all of the biology, chemistry, physics, all of the hard science I have needed, and that was surprising to me.
The thing that surprised me the most about being in neuroscience was the fact that it's not just all science. Everyone, when you say you're a neuroscience major, they think that you want to go into neurosurgery. Like, that's the number one question I get when I say that I'm studying neuroscience. But it's not all about just the science involved. Neuroscience, because it's involving the brain, you study a lot of the cellular and molecular mechanisms of neuroscience, but you're also studying how it impacts behavior.
One thing that really surprised me when I started to learn neuroscience and dive into the major was just how much our brain does without us recognizing it. I think that when people enter the neuroscience major, they kind of know what the brain does, they just want to know how it does it. What surprised me when I was learning about the functionality of the brain is it does all these things that we're not even aware that it's doing.
The thing that surprised me most about the neuroscience major was I didn't realize just how broad it would be. Maybe it'd be a little bit about biological science, but obviously there's a lot more to do with psychology as well. And so I felt like I got a really broad education, even though it was a very narrow focus.
What surprised me most about the neuroscience major was the interaction with the faculty. I thought the faculty were very accessible. They were experts in their fields and provided a great opportunity to learn from them and gain knowledge from their expertise, but also to take advantage of their mentorship.
I was surprised about how much was known about neuroscience, and yet how little we knew about neuroscience at the same time. I was surprised about how much we had to learn, but that it was really an unexplored frontier.
My favorite neuroscience class was 205, neurobiology. I was amazed at how much was packed into one class, and I read that textbook for fun sometimes, just because the neuroreceptors and all the different diseases, there's just a lot planned in there.
My favorite neuroscience class has been Neuro 480 Advanced Neuroscience, which is my favorite because it gets into what I'm most excited about, kind of more on the molecular level of neuroscience. I'm kind of getting into the physiology, which is what I do my research in.
My favorite neuroscience class was either sensation and perception or neuroanatomy. I love being able to see how the biology of the brain actually adds to my life. It makes me understand so much more of the way that my perception is and the way my world works. I thought that was really good. Really good professors too.
Behavioral neuroscience was definitely my favorite class because I did a study abroad this past semester. A lot of the homework was just to meet people, to meet locals, to understand their thoughts and to understand their behavior. And so really going out into the world and seeing how what we had learned applied to different countries and different people and taking it out of just a textbook was really, really fascinating for me.
I think my favorite neuroscience class so far has been neurobiology. Neuro 205, I took Dr. Stephenson, and he really enlightened me to the fact that neuroscience was something so much broader than just thinking about the brain.
When I was in the neuroscience program at BYU, I didn't really expect to love the anatomy class. I didn't think that the 3D reasoning that it required would really resonate with me, but I loved it. I loved the neuroanatomy class particularly because it had a lot of clinical correlates. We could learn a lot about what would happen to a person if they suffered from disease or lesions in different parts of the brain. And that is really what influenced me to go to medical school in the first place.
My favorite class for the neuroscience major was probably neuroanatomy, because I really enjoyed hands-on experience. That was probably the first class where I felt like I really learned a lot of the functionality of different parts of the brain and what they did.
My favorite neuroscience class was Neuroscience 480. That was toward the end of the major and was a class that involved multiple faculty members and was a good kind of capstone course for the major.
My favorite neuroscience class was the research class that I took with Dr. Stephenson. That's where I really learned to love research, but it's also where I learned the most about how to perform science, scientific questions, and how to analyze data.
So I started working in a research lab with Dr. Stephenson, and he had a really positive impact on me because I started my honors thesis, and I went to him with this idea, and I was like, can I start this in this lab that I've already been working in? And he was completely supportive and was like, yeah, let's run with this. Here's a list of ideas. Here's what you need to do. And it was just so mentored and so personal.
One experience that I had with a professor in neuroscience that really benefited me, I think, in my educational career was I went to go talk to Dr. Brown about taking an exam early, and instead of just leaving it at that, he then started to ask me questions about what I wanted to do and gave me advice that I really did want, but I was too nervous to ask about because I didn't want to take up his time. So that experience really kind of actually led me down a path of doing what I wanted to do and asking the questions I knew I needed to ask.
One experience I had with a professor that I do research with that really had a positive impact on me. I was actually working in his lab, and I was a little bit behind because I was dealing with some pretty serious medical concerns. And I went into his lab and his office, and I was kind of apologizing for being behind on my work. And he was very understanding for why I was behind and offered to help. But then the first thing he did was he got back down to business and was like, what can you do this week? What can you start doing? What are you able to do? And it was really positive for me because it showed me things that I could take control of and showed me things that I could do, even though it seemed like a lot of the rest of my world was a little bit uncertain. And I really appreciated that.
I work in a lab with Dr. Stephenson, and one time I went into his office and he just pulled me over and just suddenly told me that he wanted me to consider an MD PhD. That was like so, I don't know, thoughtful, I guess. And we don't have too much interaction in the lab. And for me, it was just like, whoa, I'm special to him. And how that's impacted me, I'm considering an MD PhD. I've always just wanted to go to medical school, but now I've really thought about like my options and what I can do. And I think just the fact that he really knew who I was and took time out of his day to consider what would be best for me and my potential. I really appreciated that, and it helped me see my capabilities in a different light.
I had a really great experience once with Dr. Stephenson. In Neuro 205, Neurobiology, the introductory neuroscience course, he discussed a lot about how there were some things that we were going to be studying that would shake some of the way that people thought. That some people were going to be offended in terms of the idea that the mind and the brain are so linked together.
I came to the neuroscience program right when Dr. Michael Brown joined the program, and I was very fortunate to be able to work with him a lot. I was able to TA for several of his courses, and he was a tremendous influence on me at that point. He really cared about the students, and he cared about the material, and that unity of caring about the students and the material was very profound for me.
An experience that I had that really impacted me was with my research mentor. His name is Ross Flom. I worked with him for probably about 2 or 3 years in a cognitive development lab for infants. Probably the thing that impacted me most about that was working one-on-one with a faculty member, got to know him more on a personal basis. Really looked at him as a source for advice. Probably the first time in my life that I really got into a lab and saw what it was like to do research, developing research models, writing papers, stuff like that. It really influenced a lot of the rest of what I did throughout my career.
Probably the most impactful experience of my neuroscience major was the opportunity to do research with Dr. Hopkins and Dr. Bigler in their neuroimaging lab. The interaction with them was very valuable, and the opportunity to develop a research question and seek funding for a project and carry that project through to completion was excellent training for future opportunities.
When I was in Dr. Stephenson's lab, I had a lot of really impactful experiences where I could just go and ask him questions and learn new things about neuroscience in general, about all sorts of things. I learned how to ask questions, scientific questions, and also learned how to perform new techniques that I'd never even known about.
If I could give one piece of advice, it would be go for it. If you have an idea, go for it. I've met neuroscience majors going into business, going into all sorts of psychology fields. Anything you want to do, you just run with it, because there's going to be a professor out there that's going to help you.
If I were to give advice to a neuroscience major, someone who's considering neuroscience, I would say smile, probably strap up your boots, because you'll have to do some work, but also just be willing and open to actually experience a lot of fun and to really fall in love with the subject. Lots of people kind of go through and they're just trying to get to medical school or just trying to get to graduate school, but I would advise to actually learn to love the material, and it makes it so much easier to do.
If I could give one piece of advice to my future neuroscience majors, take the opportunity to apply to your life everything that you're learning in your neuroscience classes, because like I said, if you can apply it to human, you can apply it to neuroscience, and the more that you understand neuroscience, the better your world is. You just can appreciate everything so much more, and it comes alive, and it's interesting, and it really transforms your everyday experience if you can let it.
The biggest piece of advice I would give to a neuroscience major is to just enjoy it. It's not easy. It's not easy for anybody. The brain is very complicated, and so many scientists don't even know what's going on. It's not just students. But if you just love it and live life with this positive attitude that you can do anything, and that you're a neuroscience major because you want to learn how the brain works. You want to learn how people think and why they think certain things. I think that's the biggest piece of advice I would give to anyone.
I think the biggest piece of advice I would give to future neuroscience majors would be to understand that neuroscience is such an interdisciplinary major, that you're going to be studying genetics, cell biology, physiology, and yet at the same time you're going to be studying the way people think, psychology, cognition, sensation, perception, and that all of these things are applicable to more than just science classes and graduate programs. There are a lot of people that go on to law school, different PhD programs, medical school, and that this is an opportunity to really broaden your horizons.
If I were giving someone who is in the neuroscience program right now a bit of advice about excelling and thriving in the program, I would say have fun with it, which I know sounds kind of cliche, but if you're studying something and it's not fun, you just haven't related it enough to yourself and the people that you love. If you find that way that it relates to yourself and the people around you, it will become fun, and that's when you learn, is when something is interesting, engaging, and fun.
If I could give one piece of advice to a neuroscience major, enjoy your major as much as you can. I look back on my days learning neuroscience, and the thing that really helped me is that I loved what I was doing. I loved learning about the different aspects of the brain and the nervous system, and that's something that's influenced my career decisions. I felt like ophthalmology was related to neuroscience, obviously dealing with optic nerve and visual perception. If you enjoy what you do, you're going to love it, and you'll do well.
My advice to current neuroscience majors would be to take advantage of your undergraduate years, to get to know the faculty, become acquainted with their research interests, and if possible, work with them in their labs. The opportunity to really pursue answers to a research question through a project is very valuable and will provide a great model for lifelong learning.
If a neuroscience major asks me for advice, I would suggest that they find a laboratory and try to seek out and do research in a laboratory. And there's experiences that they will get in laboratories that they can't get anywhere else. They'll learn things that they couldn't learn anywhere else, and it really is just a fantastic experience.